Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Stop the Excuses, 3 Fierce Leadership Strategies to Fix Accountability on Your Team, sponsored by Fierce and presented by Beth Wagner. With more than 17 years of professional development experience, Beth has a unique talent for helping individuals maximize their leadership potential and propel organizational effectiveness. For the past 4 years, Beth has worked directly with the Fierce Learning team to facilitate workshops, develop a global community of facilitators, and design content for the suite of Fierce program offerings. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI credit and can also be used for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. You'll receive an email from hr.com within 1 to 2 business days with your certification credit information. You can also log in to hr.com and go to your View My Credits page where you can see the credits that you've received. If you have any questions today for our presenters or for hr.com, please type them into the questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel and we'll be sure to follow up with you. And it's my pleasure now to turn you over to Beth Wagner.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sylvia. I just want to say thank you also to hr.com for partnering with Fierce and for a great introduction. So Sylvia, thanks again. As Sylvia mentioned, in addition to facilitating Fierce for really over a decade now, I come from a career that's rich in HR, which is everybody that's sitting here on this line. So it's OD, leadership, development, learning, coaching. As you can imagine, the topic that we're talking about today, which is all around accountability, is something that I've been working with leaders to address literally my entire career. And it remains a critical challenge for a lot of leaders out there. So I'm really excited to be here and to share with you some of our thoughts at Fierce around how we can start to help our cultures and our organizations begin to move toward that culture of accountability. And with that, I'm going to share with you what our journey looks like for the rest of the hour. So we're going to talk a little bit about the current state of accountability. I've got some great data points and some information, but I'm sure all of you are feeling to a certain extent that there's a gap. We need to figure out how we can start to encourage accountability in our organizations. The second thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about why it fails, because hopefully if we can get to why it fails, we can start to look at what we can be doing differently to change the culture. 3 Fierce strategies are going to come in next. So how can you as a leader start to make a difference, start to move the needle with accountability in your organization and on your teams? And then I have a wonderful story to share of an organization that Fierce is working with and share that story about how they're putting accountability into action, how they're finding success in their organization. And then you guys always bring lots of really great questions my way, so we'll have a robust, hopefully, Q&A at the end of all of this. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started and talk about the current state. So I wonder if you've ever noticed that this word accountability is rarely, if ever, used when it comes to success. You never really hear who's accountable for this when something really goes well. And these days, that word accountability tends to be more synonymous with blame, with culpability, and with wrongdoing. The high majority of us attach accountability to fault. Now, I don't know about you, but this is not a great commentary for me to jump out of bed and rush into work every day. It doesn't compel me to raise my hand really high and say, ooh, me, I want to be culpable, I want to be blamed, I want that responsibility, sign me up. Given this, it really shouldn't come as a surprise to all of us that true accountability is becoming more and more elusive these days. Or so it seems, right? But consider the environment where you work. I want you to reflect on your own organization, your own team. Are people actually admitting their mistakes? Are they apologizing or owning up when things aren't going right? Or do you find that they're pointing fingers at everyone but themselves? Are leaders and employees alike confronting the issues as they surface? Or are they throwing pity parties and repeating phrases like, it's not my fault, it's not my problem, I didn't do it. Let them figure it out. At Fierce, we hear from a large percentage of leaders who argue that they really do work in a world of little to no accountability these days. They want a fix. While employees want the responsibility, a lot of leaders are telling us that those employees are pretty quick to pass judgment or blame or go behind closed doors for some good old-fashioned victim bonding when they don't get the results that they want. No one is really taking ownership, and it's having an impact on trust in organizations. That's another big word that we tend to hear. And yet, from the many years that we've been in this field of leadership development, we've also heard employees that are arguing the same thing about their leadership. So we're hearing they aren't leading us to success. They're not communicating effectively. They're the problem. And they're pointing their fingers at leadership as the culpable party. So it appears that we have an epidemic of finger pointing happening in the workplace, and there aren't real solutions or results being produced. Now, that's our experience at Fierce, and I've got a whole group of you on the line that have your own personal and professional experiences of this thing called accountability. So I want to get a sense of what you experience where you sit. So let me go through these options first, and then we'll pull a poll out for you to work with. But what's the state of accountability in your organization? Is it a problem? You have three choices: non-existent. So yeah, we're professional finger pointers here. Accountability is really nowhere to be found. Marginal at best, so we have more blamers than owners. We have maybe a few accountability champions, but it certainly isn't a large part of our culture. And finally, thriving. So this is where accountability has literally infected our culture. It's the norm. Everyone's taking responsibility. Trust is high. So there are your three options. I'm going to ask Sylvie to launch the first poll, please, and we'll get a sense of where everybody lies. All right, so I think we have our poll in place, and it looks like people are diving right in. So here again, I encourage you, just be honest. I can't see names, so we're not certainly going to be digging into your response, but I do want to see where the group lies as a whole. And it looks like we've got most people that are sort of sitting in that marginal bucket, but let's give it just another minute, and then Sylvia, if you could broadcast those results so everybody can see them, that would be fantastic. All right, so we're broadcasting the results. It looks to me like we've got most people sitting in the middle, 78%, with a couple people of outliers. So it's non-existent, said about 9 or 10% of you, and then some of you, which I think is wonderful, said thriving. So that's great. We're going to close this poll down and talk about this a little bit. I appreciate all of your responses. If you were in that bucket that said we're thriving, I applaud you, because your organization is indeed doing something right. And then my question to you, I guess my challenge to you today, is how do you sustain that? How do you ensure that that accountability that you're experiencing right now is going to stick around tomorrow, the day after, and the day after that? And my hope is that through this webinar, we can help answer that question. If you responded marginal or even non-existent, I assure you, you are in good company. Just ask all of the other people that are on this call. In a recent workplace accountability study, and I'll flip to that data because it's pretty substantial, 91% of people rank accountability as one of the top development needs that they want to see in their organization. So it's really important, and it's a need, which means it's not being seen right now. And a Harvard Business Review study shows that 1 in every 2 managers are rated as doing too little when it comes to managing accountability. So it's a problem. It's a problem for leaders, and it's a problem for employees alike. You're likely sitting here because you want to know how to fix accountability, right? Or the lack thereof that exists on your team. We put it in the title, so clearly that's probably one of your drivers, but you're tired of the blame game, likely, or watching team members shirk responsibility, sidestep the tough conversations, make excuses for why they're not getting the results they want, and yet right off the bat, there is something that I want us, I ask us, I implore us to understand in this hour. There really is no quick fix to accountability. So I'm not here to give you a 7-step solution. I'm not even here to give you a 3-step solution. And there's no easy tricks that are going to instantly solve for this lack of accountability you're experiencing. If it were that easy, we wouldn't be seeing, and I'm going to back up, we wouldn't be seeing these data points if it were that easy, right? Because everybody would be doing it. And we wouldn't be experiencing the issues that over 80% of you said you're experiencing in your organization. Instead, we need to look at accountability for what it actually is, which is a cultural issue. It's systemic. True accountability is not a task to check off the to-do list, although many of us would like it to be, and I think it's probably even written somewhere in our job descriptions, right? That word probably exists, but it's not a job descriptor. It's a mindset. It's an ongoing conversation that we are having with ourselves and those around us through our words, through our actions, and through our follow-through. True accountability starts and ends with how we as leaders choose to think and show up every single day. So while it may be a systemic problem, the good news is it's solvable. We are the solution. It's solvable through our actions as leaders. At Fierce, we even say, if it is to be, it is up to me. And that's how I want you to approach this next 50 minutes with me, is to think about, how do I empower myself as a leader and those around me in order to choose accountability. So with that mindset, my next question to you is, why does accountability fail? Because before we go any further, I think it's important to explore why it fails in the first place. As I mentioned earlier, if we can acknowledge why it fails, perhaps we can start preventing it from happening, right? So I want to share something that's probably pretty familiar to all of us, which is the Looney Tunes cartoon of the Road Runner and Wile E. Coyote. So some of you have seen that, I'm sure. And in each of these cartoons, Wile E. Coyote utilizes these crazy complex contraptions and elaborate plans to try to catch his prey, right? And his prey is the Road Runner. And every single time he fails. He's so heads down in his next great idea, he's so heads down in his perceived genius that he doesn't realize his epic fails until it's too late. Until he's literally off the edge of a cliff or a boulder is crashing down on his head. So in a split moment, Wile E. Coyote goes from, I got you this time, bird, to, oh crap, not again, right? He doesn't actually say that, but we see that in this cartoon. We at Fierce call this a suddenly moment. And you'd be surprised just how many of us experience unintended suddenlies throughout our day in and day out. Instead of tracking ourselves, instead of ensuring we're headed in the direction we want to go and we're aware of what's happening around us and to us, we let ourselves believe that there's no need to slow down and no need to pick our head up because, hey, I'm driving for that result, right? And we realize far too quickly that it's too late. And we find ourselves just like that darn coyote off the edge of a cliff. So here's what I want you to consider. Our careers, our companies, our personal relationships, and our very lives succeed or fail gradually then suddenly, one conversation at a time. Gradually then suddenly. The unfortunate part is most of us don't wake up until suddenly. It's the pain of suddenly that actually motivates us. So suddenly a project fails. Suddenly we lose that key client. Suddenly our revenue plummets. These are events that leave us as leaders standing there saying, okay, who do I blame for this? What went wrong? Who's accountable? These are the moments that the fingers start to point. And we go looking for the great and elusive accountability. Unfortunately, by the time we've hit that suddenly, accountability is often nowhere to be found. It's MIA. It's gone missing. What we fail to recognize, and I think if we looked closer, each one of us, we would notice, is that disappearing accountability is strongly linked to the conversations that we are or are not having with those around us. Accountability fails because we're missing, we're treading lightly on, or we're altogether avoiding important conversations that need to happen with those around us, but also with ourselves. So let me share with you 3 examples of why accountability fails. Number 1, we are not slowing down to clarify expectations and check assumptions. Have you ever heard the saying, slow down to speed up? That's what I'm talking about here. The business world, as we know it, is moving at such a high rate of speed. It can be challenging to slow down. It can be challenging to ensure that roles and expectations are crystal clear with our team members. In project meetings, think about it this way. When people say the word we, so we will get this done, we're going to accomplish this, do you ever stop them and ask, who's we? Can we get clear on that? Who is we? Or do you assume they have it figured out? Well, now most of us, because we're trusting people and we trust our teams, will say, oh, they've got it figured out. They can do this. Now, I remember back in a previous role, I worked for a 6-person learning and development team. It was for a 250,000 employee company. So suffice it to say, we had a ton of projects on our plate. Now, on a team like this, it was not uncommon for all of us to be running full steam ahead and actually not realize that there were 2 or 3 people doing the exact same task. Or on the flip side, we thought that someone, quote unquote, had that when actually no one had it. And I remember I came into work one morning and I have my cup of coffee and I'm having a conversation with my peer over my cup of coffee, and she casually asks me, what's on your plate today? What do you got going on? So I mentioned to her that I had a meeting with one of the execs, and she exclaimed, oh, that's awesome. I have a meeting with him too. So we started chatting more, and we realized we were both trying to accomplish the same thing in our meetings with the same person. Now, luckily, we caught it before we wasted the VP's time and embarrassed ourselves trying to conduct 2 of the same meetings with the same person. But it brings me back to that Wile E. Coyote analogy, because we were so focused on the task, on getting it done, that we failed to pick our head up. We failed to look around to ensure that we were on the right track. And as leaders, our assumptions can get the better of us. We blindly trust that someone's got the ball when in fact no one has it. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't trust, but when we blindly or we recklessly trust and we're not doubling back and following up and checking up, we realize that no one has the ball we thought they had, or maybe they don't know they have the ball, or we all grab for the same ball without telling each other and then we knock heads, right? So that's number 1. It's about slowing down to clarify expectations and check assumptions. Number 2 is that we're taking over. We're taking over instead of allowing people the space to choose accountability for themselves. So it's one thing for a leader to help solve an issue or a problem. It's one thing for a leader to pave the way for their employees to do really good work, to get rid of some of those hurdles or challenges so that they have the space to do what we hired them to do, right? Now, it's entirely another when a leader feels the need to jump in and take over. You can call it what you want. You can call it micromanaging. You can call it control. But if you work for a leader that manages this way, or if you yourself are a leader that manages this way, it can be really easy for your team to sit back and say, hey, what do I need to do? He's got this one. I mean, I only get yelled at when I jump in, so let them take it or let him take it. And as a leader, I think we have the best of intentions. We jump in because we don't want to overload our teams, or perhaps we think they're not quite ready, or it's just easier to do it ourselves than to teach somebody else how to. Our intentions are good, but what you end up with, unfortunately, is a team of really resentful and disengaged employees, and they feel they're not being valued for the skill and the talent that you hired them to bring. Accountability naturally takes a hit. As a leader, check yourself. Are you allowing people the space to actually choose accountability, to jump in and actually take on that responsibility or that role or that project, or are you just taking over? So that's number 2, is that we're taking over and not allowing people to choose accountability for themselves. And number 3 is we're too nice. We're being too nice. So I did a whole webinar for HR.com last quarter about being too nice, if you want to check that one out. But people really do look at me funny when I say this. There really is such a thing as being too nice as a leader. When it comes to accountability, a lot of times leaders make excuses, or they validate other people's excuses. So they create this soft landing, which in fact isn't really soft, so as not to hurt someone's feelings or appear unsupportive. So let's just take a look at a general example, the young manager, right, who finds herself frustrated because her team is not delivering projects on deadline. They're not performing, they're not being successful. And so it's every time someone comes to her with a setback, she jumps in and validates their reasoning, and she practices what she calls empathy. because she can see that the reasoning is based in reality. I mean, there's some truth to their excuse. And she says things like, oh, I know the budget isn't where it should be. We don't have the funds to do what we need to do, or I get it. We have a lot of projects on the table, so it's challenging to get all this stuff done on time. She provides that soft landing without the direction. And it's hard not to validate and go down excuse lane with the team, but the excuses in the end just really lead to a greater lack of accountability, if you think about it, especially if those excuses are just simply to placate the situation and never with a forward direction to fix it. So it's not, I understand, and what can we do in order to get this project out the door? The truth is, if you don't want excuses to exist in your workplace, you can't feed into them yourself. And creating a soft landing every time mistakes are made, deadlines are missed, excuses are shared, can actually tee our teams up for a hard fall. So when we don't do these things, when we don't clarify expectation or check our assumptions, when we take over instead of creating space for accountability to flourish on our teams, when we validate other people's excuses and we don't set direction, we set ourselves up for that disappearing act of accountability. And so when something isn't going well or something is unclear or off track, what we find is that highly successful individuals slow down and have the conversation. Slow down to speed up. They don't race off the cliff because the costs of that are catastrophic. So to put a cap on this, I just want to share with you a wonderful word that we use, and it's used in the Papua New Guinea culture, in a tribe in Papua New Guinea, and it stands for that which everyone knows and no one speaks of. And it's called Mokita. Now, in certain Papua New Guinea tribes, they judge the health of their community by the number of Mokitas that exist. It's an inverse relationship. The more Mokitas, the less healthy the community. The less Mokitas, the more healthy. So the more conversations that are being surfaced, the more we're having those critical, the conversations that are so important, the more healthy our community. We want our organizations and our cultures to be healthy, right? And to do that, it just requires that we're having the necessary conversation. So here's my question to you. What are your Mokitas? What conversations are you as a leader avoiding, soft pedaling, or missing that may be leading to a failure of accountability? And I want you to take a moment. I'm actually going to give this group 60 seconds of silence to think about that. And I want you to grab a pen and whatever piece of paper is floating out there in front of you, or use your screen. I want you to write down those conversations that you know you should be having, but you aren't. And I'm going to give you 60 seconds for that. Again, what conversations are you avoiding, soft pedaling, or missing entirely that might be leading to a failure of accountability? Is it performance feedback that you have not given to someone, that you're maybe dragging your heels on because you don't want them to get upset? Is it a conversation with a manager because the way they're communicating isn't working for you? What are those conversations that have your name on them? Okay, so when we talk about fierce conversations, this is where it begins. It begins with those conversations you're tagging and saying, oh yeah, okay, I know. I've been telling myself I have to have these conversations, and maybe you're even putting rational excuses to why they're not happening. Whether it be because the mood is not right, or the lighting isn't right, or the special music isn't playing in the background. These missing conversations tend to lead to a lack of accountability. So I want to do a poll, another poll, a second poll with you, because I want to talk, we were talking about the health of your organization and Mokitas. So let's now think about how healthy our organizations really are. And I want you to think about this. You have three choices. We're burning up. So yeah, we've got lots of Mokitas. We're not clarifying expectations. We're not slowing down to let people choose accountability. Two is low-grade fever. We're soft pedaling. We're treading lightly. Perhaps we're worried that we're going to hurt feelings, so maybe we're being too nice. And 3 is a picture of health. So we're addressing issues as they arise. We're slowing down and ensuring everyone is on the same page, even when the conversations are difficult to have. So I'm going to ask Sylvie to launch the second poll for us. So we have an opportunity. I'm looking at everybody responding now. And we'll give it just a couple of more seconds as everybody responds before we broadcast. Are you burning up? Is it a low-grade fever, or are you the picture of health? Okay, so Sylvie, I'm going to ask if you would broadcast the results, please. And it looks to be that the majority of people are in the first 2 categories. We've got a couple of people that are the picture of health, which is awesome, and the majority of us are stuck in that first or second, burning up or low-grade fever. We're sick. You know, if your culture is dominated by moquitas, dominated by conversations that aren't happening that should be, my question to you is, what is it that you're actually talking about? And I don't mean that to be flippant. I'm really asking you, when you're going into meetings, when you're taking your precious time, and we all consider our time precious, to have conversations, but we're not talking about the real issues, what are we actually doing? How many conversations are a waste of our time, aren't getting us results, or worse, lead to assumptions and that lack of accountability? There's a lot at stake. And missing conversations can be so costly for our individuals and for a culture. I want to go back now to our original quote, which is, our careers, our companies, our personal relationships, and our very lives succeed or fail gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. If you notice, it says succeeds, one conversation at a time. So just as we found that accountability can disappear when we're not having the conversations, we can create the opposite effect when we put skill and courage to work and invite those conversations to happen. So as you're all sitting here, the big question is, great, Beth, what are the behaviors? What do I do? Help me understand how I can start practicing, right? Again, if it is to be, it's up to me. What can I do to help my team choose accountability and realize success? How do I help shift the culture? I want to be healthy. So before we get into the fierce strategies, I have a quote to share with you that is going to serve as our rudder as we think about these 3 strategies. Lou Gerstner, who is the former CEO of IBM, once said, management doesn't change culture. Management invites the workforce itself to change the culture. So remember, I talked about empowerment a little bit earlier on. These strategies that I'm about to share with you are about taking the power back to make a difference. They're going to help you invite those conversations that are necessary for accountability, to not just survive, but to actually thrive in your organization. So let's look at those. 3 fierce strategies. The first one is to be more self-aware. Let's dig into this a little bit. A few moments ago, we said that effective leaders track trends, right? They're more aware of their surroundings. They're more aware of the impact they're having on others. And they stay awake during that gradually, so that they don't find themselves facing an unintended suddenly. Having a greater sense of self allows you to better monitor how accountable you are and the behavior that you're modeling for others. This awareness actually allows you to course correct as you need to, so you don't find yourself or your team unintentionally hanging off that cliff. And there's research that backs this up. So for those of you who are saying, yeah, self-awareness, I get it, move on, we're pausing here. The first study that was referenced in a Harvard Business Review article recently states, when it comes to decision-making, coordination, and conflict management, teams that have a low degree of self-awareness are actually less than half as effective as teams that are highly self-aware. A lack of self-awareness in leadership comes with a heavy price. And in a study that was undertaken by Green Peak Partners and Cornell University, they examined 72 executives at public and private companies with revenues ranging from $50 million to $5 billion. And it was found through that study that a high self-awareness score was the strongest predictor of overall success. So we've built the business case. This is important. So what do you do? How do you become more self-aware? What does that look like? First, ask for feedback. Feedback is a really big topic and skill these days. There's a sea change that's happening in performance management. There's a lot of talk about how do we start getting and receiving feedback on a regular day-to-day basis, not just once or twice a year. And I'd like to ask you, because as leaders, we often think about giving that feedback, right? Keeping our teams on track. But if you think about your current role in your leadership, do you have curiosity around your own performance? Do you know where you stand with your leader, your direct reports, your colleagues, yourself in relation to your efforts? Sometimes the key to building accountability on our teams requires that we as leaders change our own behavior, that we get a better sense of what it is that we're doing, and if that matches what we think we're doing. There's a leader here at Fierce who formally asks her team for one area of focus and feedback every quarter. She is the kind of person that will also continually ask for that feedback and provide it on a day-to-day basis. And once every quarter, she puts some rigor around it. She wants to continue to improve her leadership, so she credits these ongoing conversations with helping her stay the course and assess how she's really doing. It makes her a stronger leader for her team, and it creates unification. Everybody's on the same page. She doesn't know what she's going to hear every time. So that's the other thing. There is risk inherent in this, because what you may be thinking is your performance or your impact might be very different from what you're hearing. But she uses her courage and trusts that feedback to lead her and her team to better results. So while feedback might not always be the easiest to hear, truly asking and understanding others' perspectives unlocks so much potential, because now you have a roadmap. Now you know what it is that you need to focus on. So my question to you is, who will you ask? My challenge to you today is to have a conversation with your boss, with a direct report, or with a colleague about your own performance. Oftentimes we get that feedback from our boss. So while I encourage you to continue to ask for it, challenge yourself. Maybe it's someone you don't usually seek feedback from, and ask for feedback. Put away your assumptions of how you think you're doing, and instead get curious about what's really going on. So that's number one in terms of self-awareness, is asking for feedback. And number two is to reflect. Well, that's just one simple word with 7 little letters. But there have been many studies that have been done regarding the critical component that reflection plays in performance. So as a leader, how are you performing? Reflection can be a big indicator. According to behavioral scientist and Harvard professor Francesca Gino, people or individuals who take time out to reflect on their success and their mistakes perform 20 to 25% better than those who don't. 25%, that's a whopping number. That's not just saying I'm doing a little bit more. That's a big number. The reflective leader actually acknowledges their performance, good or bad, and learns from it. They're willing to show up differently because they're modeling accountability. If you've never actively reflected, if this is you, if you think, oh, I don't have the time, give me an extra 15 minutes, maybe I'll think about it. If you've never carved out 10 to 15 minutes each day or each week to consider your actions and your impact on others, I want to share a few powerful questions that will hopefully get you started. There are so many questions you could be asking yourself, so understand these are just a few of my favorites. And I encourage you to go bananas. Ask yourself what it is that you need to be focused on. The first one is, what excuses did I make this week for mistakes or for bad results, either in my head or out loud? And then more importantly, what impact does this have on my team and our success? Acknowledging that. The second question is, what do my actions tell me about myself? So what patterns am I noticing? And what impact do those patterns have on my performance, and more importantly, the overall performance of my team? You're really getting in and digging in to say, how is it that I'm showing up, and what are the implications? And then my third recommended question that I absolutely love is, how do I want others to experience me? This is a great question before heading into a meeting with your team. Heading into a larger group discussion cross-collaboratively, even on the phone. How do I want others to experience me? What do I need to do or say differently to ensure that they experience me that way? These are powerful reflective questions. And again, as Gino and her team acknowledged, they help you perform better. So I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. Actually, first of all, I'm going to back up for a second because I want to share a little bit of information. Daniel Goleman, who I remember if they call him the father or the grandfather of emotional intelligence, but he's definitely rooted there in history in terms of this evolution of emotional intelligence. And he's an internationally renowned psychologist. And he has been known to say that self-awareness is really the key cornerstone to EQ, to emotional intelligence. The ability to monitor our emotions and thoughts from moment to moment is key to understanding ourselves better and proactively managing our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. Self-aware people act consciously rather than reacting passively. They're more inclined to show up accountably, modeling the behavior they want to see from their teams. And I talked a little bit about what you're modeling for those around you, and I want to leave you with an even greater question to ponder for yourself. You're always modeling something. The question is, what are you modeling? What are you modeling? Okay, so that's number one. Number two, ditch the shortcuts. So as we talked about earlier, accountability, there's no quick fix. It's a cultural issue, and there are no sustainable shortcuts when trying to build this culture that you're seeking. But that doesn't prevent us leaders from really trying to find a faster way. The reality is, as much as you may want to, you can't actually hold someone accountable. In fact, the workplace accountability study also revealed that 82% of their respondents feel they really have no ability to hold other people accountable. They get that. And in fierce accountability, we talk a lot about the difference between holding someone accountable and holding someone able. When you hold someone able, you choose to recognize the capacity of each person you're connecting with so that you can achieve the goals that you've agreed upon. There's trust inherent in that. But still, and I get it, it can be really hard to watch our teams day in and day out when they're strongly entrenched in this victim mentality or finger pointing, right? So to combat this, leaders often lead into a few popular strategies to entice someone quickly to get out of victim and into accountability. And while each of these strategies can be a short-term solution, they create huge issues when we try to sustain them. So I'm going to share a couple with you right now. The first shortcut to avoid is fear. And fear happens when a leader simply lays down the hammer and says, you're going to do this or else you're going to lose your bonus, or else you could be demoted, or else in the long run, we might not need you anymore, right? The short-term benefit to fear is that it actually works because, hey, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose money. I'm going to do everything it takes. I'm going to kill myself to get this job done. The problems with using fear as a long-term strategy are many. If you think pushback isn't happening, you are ill-informed. Pushback is happening, even though people are nodding their head saying, okay, I'll do it. And it's happening behind the leader's back because these individuals are afraid to speak up when they don't think something's going to work. This erodes trust big time. So your employees are likely going to begin to resent you, and that resentment, it leaks out of them and onto other people. It spreads. The end result is that you lose emotional capital with your employees, and that erodes performance and can even drive your talent away. So now we're talking about huge costs associated when you're using fear. On the surface, fear can look like a really enticing strategy, but underneath that surface, those waters are pretty darn murky. The second shortcut to avoid is advice. And this is hard. I am not saying, nor is Fierce saying, never ever give advice. However, choose wisely is what we're saying. When a leader only ever imparts their own wisdom on an employee to help them be more accountable or take more responsibility, the results aren't following that. We oftentimes use advice because it's a simple solution. It gives someone else, in our opinion, the right approach, right? So they don't make the same mistakes we did, or they're successful. And not to mention, we get to be the expert, and it feels good. Feels good to help someone. The list of problems, though, are long. So one, it doesn't strengthen the person you're giving advice to. They're not working to problem solve for themselves or make decisions for themselves. And this creates a dependency. In the end, they just keep coming back for more advice. So remember back to why accountability fails. And when I said when leaders take over, instead of allowing their teams to problem solve or make decisions on their own, they're removing the chance for true accountability to surface, right? So that's number one. You're really not building skill in terms of problem solving for an individual. In addition, what works for you may not work for them. I recently heard an interview with Joe Owen. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of him. He's an award-winning leadership author, quite brilliant. And he said, the rules for survival and success change. So what worked for you in the past won't always work in the future. The best leaders know this, and they remain flexible. So it's almost like reinventing ourselves. And I think the best way to reinvent ourselves and our teams is through the expertise and knowledge of the individuals we hired to do wonderful things in our organizations, to lean into their expertise. In addition, if your advice to them goes wrong, who's to blame? You are, right? The fingers come pointing back. So until you and the people around you see how accountability serves your needs and choose to be accountable, then the best that you can really hope for is an environment that is wrought with resentful compliance or that undercurrent of victim. The kind of it's not my problem, it's theirs mentality. Go talk to them. So my question to you is, how do you help others to see the choice of accountability for themselves? And I have a recommendation. Get curious. That's not necessarily a tool in and of itself, but I believe it can be a powerful step forward in terms of trying to increase accountability on our teams. The best way to guide others toward accountability is to move to curiosity and make sure there's a bias toward action. We want to get stuff done here. When you find you and your team stuck, so pointing fingers, ranting about all the ways we can't, the single best thing to do is drop into question mode. Engage your team members in their own reflection. We talked about how important that is by leveraging powerful, open-ended questions. These are things that as leaders we're not taught to do. We're not taught to ask powerful questions. There are books on it. There are books of hundreds of questions that are open-ended. So if you're really looking for some help, I'm sure you can Google that. But you know, it's just as simple as asking your employees, what is most important to you? What's going on for you right now? How do you feel about this work, this project, this team? How do you think you're impacting others? Have you helped them reflect on their behavior? What's preventing you from getting the results that you want, and how will you succeed? Big, open-ended, exploratory questions, very powerful. So we focus at Fierce on the behavior of being curious in our Fierce accountability classes, because the key to success really does lie in building that question-asking muscle as a leader. So often we're led to believe that as leaders we need to impart our wisdom, our expertise. We've gotten to the positions we've gotten to because we know it. We know it all, and now we're leading. And in fact, the more powerful position is to take a step back and get curious. So help your team reflect, again, that word, right, on where they are and where they want to go. Because more importantly, it's really about helping them determine how their current thinking may be getting in their way or might be helping them succeed. And by getting curious and asking questions, you're creating space. You're allowing your team members to look past what's limiting them and choose accountability. And then finally, as our third and final strategy, we have take responsibility for your emotional wake. And what I mean here simply is, are you taking responsibility for the impact that you are having on others? And this goes hand in hand with our self-awareness strategy, and I thought it was important enough to give it some individual focus. I'm in this boat. I mean, I think most of us will do anything to avoid being wrong. I don't like the feeling. It's not fun. And oftentimes we'll even do more to prove that we're right. But here's a question. What if our need to be right is what is really wrong? I watched a very powerful TED Talk the other day, and the speaker asked, how does it feel to realize you're wrong? And she got answers like, oh, it's embarrassing, it's devastating, it's excruciating. Who wants that, right? We would logically try to avoid situations where we feel embarrassed or devastated or pained in some way. And this got me thinking, perhaps this woman should be asking a different question. while it might be uncomfortable to realize we're wrong or we've made a mistake, the bigger question as leaders that we should be asking ourselves is, what's the cost when we're wrong and we don't acknowledge it or we don't own up to it? What price do we pay, and more importantly, do those around us pay? There is one very powerful way to take responsibility and own up to the wake that we create when things go wrong. You were likely taught this when you were the ripe old age of 2 or 3, right? It's one of the earliest lessons we get as kids. Say I'm sorry when you hurt someone. Say I'm sorry when you make a mistake. And yet, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I certainly have in my years of HR, those 2 little words, I'm sorry, seem to be the hardest 2 words for some leaders to muster. Now, I'm not saying that about all of us. There are many people who are really good at being able to do that, and it is a powerful tool as a leader. But let's think about it this way. What if all the leaders in the world, including you and me, apologized every time we realized something we had done had harmed someone or failed to accomplish what we said we would? Even if it wasn't intentional, which oftentimes it isn't. Most of us don't wake up and say, I'm going to go screw up today. I think that would be a hoot. But wouldn't it be refreshing if when people made mistakes, even if it wasn't intended, that they authentically showed up and said, you know, geez, I am so sorry. Let's figure out how to solve for this, but I have to tell you, I made a mistake. What would happen to trust? What would happen to what's going on in the media today when you turn on the television? Here's a very recent, that's a very highly publicized example in the last couple of months. And some of you probably caught a glimpse of at least a glimpse of the recent testimony of Mark Zuckerberg, who's the chairman and CEO of Facebook. He was giving some testimony to Congress last month because the personal data of about 50 million Americans had been improperly shared with a little political consultancy known as Cambridge Analytica that no longer exists anymore. And so while I don't need to rehash that week, I just found it really refreshing. And I remember rewinding the news that morning because I found it so refreshing to hear a leader and his team, for that matter, take accountability. Now, granted, people can throw a lot of things out there like they didn't do it soon enough or they should have done it sooner. And in that moment, when he said it was my fault, I take full responsibility, and repeated it over and over and over again throughout the week, that was refreshing. He said, we have a responsibility to protect your data, and if we can't do that, we don't deserve to serve you. We made mistakes, and we're going to step up and fix those. So I know that while an apology can't fix, quote unquote, the problem with Facebook, because we're talking about cybersecurity, it's going to require more than that to reinstate Facebook users and their faith, but it was a first step. And what we always talk about at Fierce is that you can't fix something you don't acknowledge. And that tends to be something that we oftentimes partner with our clients to figure out is, what are those pain points? What's preventing you from succeeding? Because oftentimes we can't put our finger on it and it becomes difficult. But throughout my years in HR and working with leaders, I truly have seen many leaders who are unable to acknowledge their own mistakes. And with these leaders, when mistakes are made, what happens is finger pointing begins. So the leader denies culpability. They have a mentality of, no, it wasn't me, but I'm going to find the guilty party. That's my job. And there's a refusal to step up, own it, and make a change. Owning up and taking responsibility, while it can be painfully difficult, is an accountable act. And it encourages others to do the same. That's modeling behavior for other people. So consider this. Here's my challenge to you. Do you have apologies that are left unspoken? Are they building up in your drawer of mojitos? And if so, while it might be really hard, consider the impact if you shared those apologies out loud to the person or people, groups of people who deserve them. There is no expiration date, at least to my knowledge, on saying I'm sorry. So what would that say about you as a leader, and how could that help shift the culture? All right, so we've explored 3 strategies, and I'm going to do one more quick poll with all of you before we start wrapping things up and leave a few minutes for questions. But now that you've listened to these, I want you to do your own heavy lifting here and challenge yourself. Which strategy has your name on it? Which one do you want to start practicing and focusing on more? The first is be more self-aware, so asking for feedback, reflecting. Ditch the shortcuts, avoid fear and advice giving, and instead get curious. or take responsibility for your emotional wake. So apologize, start owning up when you make mistakes. And I'm going to ask Sylvie to launch the final poll for us so that we can get a sense of where people want to put their attention. And this is really the first step. So as you're thinking about this, make a commitment to shift your behavior, because that's where change will happen. So we've got a lot of people that are voting for themselves, and it looks like here again, the top two tend to be the most popular, but we'll give it just another minute or moment, and we'll broadcast the results. I'll get to about 60% of people voted, and then we'll broadcast. Okay, Sylvie, if we can broadcast the results on where they stand right now, that would be great. So as you can see, almost 50% said, I really need to be more self-aware. Asking for feedback and reflecting on my behavior is important. But we have people that also want to ditch the shortcuts or take responsibility for their emotional wake. And here again, thank you for committing. True accountability, as we said before, and this is just a reminder, isn't a task to check off the to-do list. It's a mindset, and there are tools that we can start to leverage to help us with that. So these are ongoing conversations we're having with ourselves, with those around us, through our words and our actions and our follow-through, and these three strategies can help us get there. So before we wrap up, I have just a couple of moments that I'd like to share. A wonderful story of one of our Fierce clients. They generously allowed us to use their logo and their story. They're working hard to shift their culture of accountability. This is Precor. So while they've learned that shifting a culture is not an overnight event, they're really proving that with the right support and the leadership commitment, change is happening. Many of you know that Precor is a global manufacturing company. They design and manufacture fitness equipment. What I found interesting is that their mission is focused on developing personalized health and fitness experiences to help people live the lives they desire. That seems like it would fit. But also, they cultivate a culture that believes in mutual respect and the overwhelming returns of sharing. And to me, as we're talking about accountability, that spoke. It leapt off the page to me. So Precor came to Fierce because they were experiencing some of the same stuff we talked about today. Although accountability was being practiced, there was a lack of clarity around who owned what and uncertainty around who was actually responsible. So they decided to do something about it. They partnered with us to help them shift their culture, and they began to roll out Fierce accountability workshops about a year ago. This has been a year in the making to senior leadership, and then to this day, they are slowly making their way through the rest of the organization. So they knew it was going to be a long-term solution. It was not an immediate change, and it took some time. By month 9 and 10, they started to see a palpable shift. Employees started to express themselves more freely. This is behavior that they started tracking. They started to take more ownership of problems, employees did, and in addition, there was less fear in the system of making mistakes. There was a willingness to explore new ways of doing things, some risk-taking that was showing up, and employees were asking for more. So we want more conversations. We want more responsibility. We want more skills to help us with our goals. So now Precor is growing in their understanding of what it means to be accountable, and we're really excited to continue this journey with them and work with them to measure not just the cultural impact that they're seeing and feeling right now, but also the business results that are being realized because they decided to transform their organization one conversation at a time. So we're excited to continue on in this journey, and I use them as a bit of inspiration. It's when you start to see that, yes, it takes time, and yes, we have to commit to a shift, there is no quick fix to accountability. So again, I urge you to continue to reflect on your own leadership behavior. How are you showing up? And is it getting you the results that you want, or is your behavior getting in your way? And how do you start to show up differently? And as a reminder, those 3 leadership strategies. Be more self-aware, ditch those shortcuts, and take responsibility for your emotional wake. All right, so before I get to questions, I know I have just a couple minutes left. I want to offer you something. We want to offer you at Fierce something for joining us today. We have a wonderful ebook called Fierce Insights into 6 Leading Problems Businesses Face Today and How to Solve Them. It kind of takes our conversation of accountability to the next level, and we'd love to share a copy of that with you. All you have to do is text accountability to 72,000. and we'll send you that. So I encourage you to seek that out. And with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to my wonderful peer, Caitlin Sorensen, who's been gathering your questions up, and she's going to fire away at me so I can answer some of them, hopefully. Caitlin?
Thank you, Beth. The first question is from Jim. You mentioned a TED Talk that you watched. What was the name of that?
So there were, I think,
afterwards.
Yeah, I think that would be best because I think I have it saved somewhere on my computer, but for the life of me, I think this is the one about the woman that was talking about being wrong and what that feels like. So I'd have to look that up. But yes, we can find that and send it out.
Perfect. Another question from Jody is, do you have examples or advice on how to ask for feedback, i.e. what to say? She is a boss and wants to ask her team.
Yeah, so one of the first things that I always say when you're asking for feedback is general questions will get you general answers. So oftentimes I think the biggest mistake that leaders who have great intentions make is that we say, so how am I doing? Got any input or advice for me or anything I could be doing differently? And that can be really, think about someone asking you that question. It's very tough to answer. So I get really clear on what you want to learn about yourself. Is it how you communicate when you're in team meetings? I mean, get as specific as that. Is it, making time to have one-on-one conversations with people? How's that going, those one-on-one conversations? Whatever your feedback is, make it specific, that whatever you want to get, because that's going to help you, first of all, to get the information that you need versus just a blanket, oh, I think it's great. And it's also going to help your team member because I think it can be difficult when we're asked general questions. So that would be my biggest piece of advice when you're asking for feedback.
Wonderful. Jacqueline asked, how do I make my managers aware that accountability is a problem they need to fix on their team?
Okay, so that they need to fix on their team. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I'm laughing just because I think that's a brutally honest question is we're noticing that there's accountability problems. So go to our leader and say, you need to fix this, right? You need to be aware of this. And again, I remind you of Lou Gerstner, who said management, and I would add HR doesn't change culture. It invites the workforce itself to change the culture. So I would say enter into a dialogue with your manager. This is about giving feedback. You can be giving feedback up, but instead of just saying, fix it, here's what's happening, fix it, I might go in curious and ask my manager, what's your experience of the environment right now, or the vibe, the temperature on our team? How would you describe that? Or what challenges do you see that we're facing? Or I'd even ask, just for being able to say, from my perspective, here's what I'm hearing, here's what I'm experiencing, and here are the risks that I think are attached to that. So here again, it's opening the door to conversation. So many times we think to ourselves, well, hopefully something falls from the sky and hits my boss in the head and they realize what's going on around here. And what we fail to recognize is that we are the missing piece. If we're noticing it, then it's up to us to invite that conversation to happen. So I guess my encouragement would be that you're following what we talked about today and getting curious and providing that opportunity for the conversation to happen.
Wonderful. If we have time for one more, another Jacqueline asked, is accountability translatable to volunteer nonprofit organizations? And if so, how?
Oh, yes. To me, accountability lives in every individual group of people. It exists in our homes. I mean, it exists, if you have children, so yes. And then I've done so much work with nonprofits and with volunteers. And I think that that's a place, it can be tricky sometimes, right? Because you're not working with people who are getting paid to do this, but it's the same thing. You're having conversations around how do we get the results that we want? And how do you engage people create that space where they get excited to volunteer, to show up, to say, I'm going to be there at 6 o'clock, and I show up at 6 o'clock to do what I said I would do. It's the same skill set that we talked about today. So I thank you for asking that, because it opens the door to say, this is not just about your organization or your business. Accountability is something that we're all seeking everywhere in our lives, and these skills can help. So thank you for the question. And I'm not sure if we lost our Caitlin or not.
Or do we have time for more?
Oh. Sylvia, are we at the top of the hour? Are we done, or do we have time for another question?
I think that we, since
not really.
It's 1:01, okay, I think we should probably wrap up.
Okay.
And we will
Sounds
be
good.
able to respond to any questions that we didn't get to live. We can respond via email. I know we got a lot of questions about how to receive the download when not in the US. So we're happy to send that via email. You can also email coordinator@fierceinc.com if you want something sooner than we get back to you.
Wonderful. So with that, I'll just say thank you on behalf of Fierce and turn it over to Sylvia if there are any to share before we wrap up.
I'd like to thank and the fabulous team at Fierce for this very informative and fun webcast today. We really appreciate your sharing your knowledge with us. Just a few reminders for our attendees. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available for up to 7 days for our free members. And of course, if you have a recertification membership or HR Genius membership, then you have unlimited access to all of our archives. All webcast credits are stored in your hr.com account under your View My Credits page, and you will also receive an email from hr.com within 1 to 2 business days with your certification credit information. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that will appear on your screen once the webcast is ended. And that is also another opportunity to submit questions or comments to our presenters today. That will all be passed on to them. And if they didn't get to your questions, they will definitely reach out to you with answers to those. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.